Ultimate software, people first.
And by Cinelerra. If you're a business owner, you know that managing sales tax is a complex and time-consuming process.
For the last 20 years, the Cinelerra Reverb plugin has brought life to drab-sounding vocals and instruments played in tiny living rooms. Those living rooms are a lot smaller today than they were 20 years ago. That's why we need reverb, and we need it more than ever. Reverb was the very first effect when the Lion Kingdom began writing audio editors many decades ago. The reverb is a multi-channel effect. Here we've attached a single effect to a single track to just create reverb for one track. Let's load the same sound file onto 2 tracks. Create a second output channel and attach the reverb as a shared effect.
We survived the zombie apocalypse. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace Tech.
In this mode, the reflections paste to both tracks, and we get artificial stereo. You can also attach reverb to multiple tracks by going to the context-sensitive menu for each track. Attach it to one track, and then attach it from the shared effects menu for the other track.
Or Z, and the Zombie Survival Guide. Complete protection from the living dead.
For the first time in its history, the reverb has received a major upgrade. The main problem with the old reverb was the low-pass filter applied to the reflections. As we went forward in time, every reflection had a lower cutoff frequency. There was a starting and ending cutoff frequency, and usually you would set the ending cutoff frequency lower than the starting cutoff frequency. The low-pass filter was a fur filter because we didn't have read-ahead functionality, so it didn't completely cut off all the high frequencies. This caused the original low-pass filter to preferentially accent the low frequencies while not cutting off the high frequencies. The result was transients which rattled and low notes that tended to overpower all the other sounds. The main difference today is we have a full bandpass filter instead of a low-pass filter. The bandpass filter is shown on the frequency graph, along with the frequencies it's passing. It's constant for all the reflections, and cuts off the stop bands completely. The bandpass filter is still applied only to the reflections, and not the original signal. Aside from the bandpass filter, the new reverb has the same parameters as before. Initial signal level, how loud the original signal is. In practical use, this is never anything but 0 dB, but you can fade it out and just hear the reflections. Milliseconds before the reflections. This is usually below 50 milliseconds. Make it long enough, and it can sound like a second voice is talking in the background.
I've got a crazy, wild invention. It's called a water purification filter. It is very simple. It uses something called a pump, which
starting and ending reflection levels. A traditional reverb goes from -20 to -40. You can make the reflections more overpowering by raising the first reflection level.
All over the world are starting to experience as climate change becomes more and more of a reality.
One trick is the reflection levels can get louder instead of softer over time. Let's start at -40, go up to 0, and let's mute the original signal. This gives you an inverted reverb. Next we have the number of reflections. This can be nearly 0, or it can be many hundreds until you run out of CPU time. If the number of reflections is too small, you'll lose the illusion of a reverb, and it'll sound more like a chorus.
And the monsters come? Well, here's a little more.
Devolution is the story of a high-tech, very high-end eco-community.
The higher the number of reflections, the lower the reflection level has to be to keep the sound from overloading.
Rain erupts and cuts the residents off from civilization. And suddenly they go from 21st century to an eco-village in the Middle Ages.
The number of reflections is normally between 100 and 150 for useful durations of reverb. Milliseconds of reverb. The most useful values here are 500 to 1000. The milliseconds of reflections begin exactly at the milliseconds before reflections and then extend to the milliseconds of reflections plus the milliseconds before reflections after the original signal. The reflections are all randomly placed.
refrigerator.
If we reduce the milliseconds of reflections, it takes a smaller number of reflections to create the same illusion of reverb, but we have a much smaller room.
Whenever you want it. But that's a razor-thin margin, and all it takes is one tweak, one little
If we
disaster.
increase the milliseconds of reflections, it takes many more reflections to create the illusion, but it simulates a much larger room.
Brooks promised us he would come back in May and talk more about the book. The Hollywood Reporter has an excerpt of it from back in August, and apparently a movie is already
It also takes a lot more CPU time to have a longer reverb because we start working outside the CPU's cache. So for the typical concert hall, we keep it at around 1000 milliseconds. Now we come to the bandpass filter. The bandpass filter is defined by 3 parameters: the low frequency,
in real time, and bring together the right people to fix problems faster and prevent them from happening again.
the high frequency,
solutions before problems.
Software dedicated to putting people first with innovative solutions for HR, payroll, and talent management.
and the
Software,
steepness.
People first.
And by Avalara. If you're a business owner, you know that managing sales tax is a complex.
The best
and
reverb
time-consuming
results
process.
have been happening with a low frequency of around 100 Hz, a high frequency of around 6 kHz, and a steepness around 0.85. If you make the low frequency too low, it'll make the low sounds overpower all the other sounds. If you make the high frequency too high, transients will rattle instead of sounding like reverb.
And they have experts in 15 countries around the world to help as you grow. Learn more at AVALARA.
The window size defines how many frequency slots are used in the bandpass filter. Higher values make the filter smoother, but also increase the latency of the effect. The usual window size is 4096 samples.